Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, and more, including smaller deals that you can do without significant capital. My name is Satori Capital, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest Podcast. Let's get started. Sunny Vanderbeck is an investor, entrepreneur, best-selling author, and former military leader. He co-founded Satori Capital, a multi-strategy investment firm founded on the principles of conscious capitalism. And he previously co-founded and served as CEO of technology at company Data Return. For more than a decade, Sunny led that company through all phases of growth and transformation, receiving numerous honors, including Entrepreneur of the Year finalist designation from Ernst & Young. His experiences with DataRun, along with subsequent involvement in dozens of private businesses at Satori, led Sunny to publish his first book, Selling Without Selling Out, How to Sell Your Business Without Selling Your Soul. I love that. I love the conscious capitalism piece. I love the not selling your soul piece. The book serves as a roadmap for business leaders who face unique challenges and quandaries involved in selling a business or taking on a financial partner. Welcome to the podcast, Sunny.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So listen, I remember, in our pre-call and in your bio, this discussion of, obviously a deals podcast, buying and selling businesses, the experience you had as not only as a principal, what you do now, but then also the conscious capitalism and the conversation of not selling out, are really aligned with my heart and soul and what I believe in. But before we get into all that, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because I'm guessing that maybe an executive and somebody who works and buys and sells businesses and an author might have not have been it back then, but you tell me.
Yeah, definitely not author. On the book piece, never had dreams of being an author, but the book had to be written. Like no one was talking about this stuff like everybody wants to talk about the money part, and that's cool. But there are a lot of other things that turn out to matter to us as humans. So yeah, growing up, lawyer, Wall Street, geneticist, which, today you're like, yeah, we know what that stuff is. In the, 80s, it was not very widely known. So to put it another way, I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Well, you know what? Even those of us who thought we knew what we wanted to be had no idea what we wanted to be, because almost nobody ends up there. But at least, that's interesting. Geneticist at that time. Yeah. How did you know even what that was?
Yeah, no idea. Maybe a good biology teacher somewhere, but so I was always doing something new. If there was a pattern, it was like, oh, he's doing that new thing now, which, that's kind of played out across my life as well. You don't usually see Ranger to technology or technology to private equity, but here I am.
Yeah. I love it. So what was your first deal of any type? It could have been something small when you were a kid, or maybe it's early in your career. Anything you would consider a deal. What was the first deal you can remember?
Oh, my first deal, I couldn't tell you the address, but I still remember what the house looked like. I figured out that I could sell, and I just tried it. Like I didn't know it was going to work.
Yeah.
Basically, and I would have been, second or third grade. So I convinced this family at this house in the neighborhood to let me, mow the lawn and weed eat and all that stuff, and a small price. And then I went to some of the other kids in the neighborhood, and I paid one kid $5 to mow the lawn and another kid $2 to weed eat the lawn. And I had $3 left over. And I was like, hey, this is kind of cool.
I love it. Leveraging. So I want to ask one follow-up on that, because listen, so many of us as kids, mowed lawns and shoveled snow and did whatever, but it didn't cross our minds to outsource that or hire that or subcontract that or whatever, we want to call it. Like how did that idea come to you?
I really have no idea. It was, I think maybe it was, I wonder if I could pull this off. So I'm a curious guy. And so I always wonder about stuff. And sometimes I'll just go see it and I'll just go try it. And so I think I wondered about that. I'm like, I think it came from, sometimes you get the job to mow, but there wasn't a weed eating job. Like some of the houses just wanted the mowing done. And I kind of put it all together and let me try it and see what happens. And it wasn't like, I wasn't, sitting in front of a computer writing a business plan.
Right.
It was a little just entrepreneurial hustle. I don't know, I'll try this. One of the funding sources for my first real business in the early days, so this would have been like 1996.
Yeah.
We were broke as hell trying to start a company, no venture capital, metaphorically and probably actually eating some ramen.
Yep.
I had a pretty good hunch they would do these technology auctions. And I had a pretty good hunch that if I bought a big giant pallet of CD-ROM drives, that a bunch of them would actually work. And I kind of figured out what I thought I could sell them for. And, this thing was like Friday at midnight or some goofy time.
Yeah.
Anyway, I bought a few pallets of them for not a lot of money, because who wants to buy 300 CD-ROM drives?
Yeah.
Me, apparently. And I took them to a swap meet and sold them for like $25 a piece. Swap meet was also in the middle of the night on the next weekend, and got some cash flow to be able to fund the next whatever thing we were doing in this tech business. It takes a little bit of Scrabble sometimes. This is not I raised $5 million and I hired 6 great execs. And like the early days are a little harder than that.
Oh yeah. So was that, you mentioned for a tech, was that a business prior to Data Return?
Well, that was the very early days of Data Return.
Okay.
We were broke and had not figured out product market fit. And we had some revenue, but we kind of had rent to pay and we wanted to do more marketing. And I saw a good shot at a trade to be done and it worked. And so I did that a few more times because we needed revenue.
I love it. All right. So let's talk about the deal journey on Data Return. Tell folks a little bit more about what Data Return did. But then also I know that, I actually don't know whether you raised any capital, did anything, but I know there was a point at which you exited that business, and then I'll let you tell.
Yeah. So I'll give you
what
the
happened after
rundown.
that. So give us a little bit on Data Return.
Yeah. So look, we grew very quickly. We grew 40% every quarter for 3.5 years.
Wow.
Which meant we doubled our headcount every 120 days.
Wow.
There's nothing I can tell you to explain what that was like.
Yeah.
It was a good thing I was in my 20s because you needed, all the energy you could muster to just keep the wheels from falling off. But we had a good business. Customers needed what we did pretty bad. So we took it public on the NASDAQ.
Okay. What did the company do?
It was mission critical managed hosting. So here's what that means. H&R Block online tax filing, that kind of stuff. Like it has to work.
Yeah.
So we didn't build the apps, but they would hand us these junky apps because it was the early days in the internet and everything was junky, and say, keep them running.
Okay.
So that was our gig.
Right. So
our customers mostly didn't want the heat on themselves. They're like, yeah, let's give them.
Right. They want an outside party to be able to blame if things went bad, right?
Yeah. So I was 27 when we went public.
Yeah.
I stayed on as CEO through that and kind of figured that out. And we had one of our investors was a company called Compaq.
Yeah.
And we shared a board member. We were really close. Compaq was going to acquire my company. It was a perfect deal. Everything lined up. The cultures were aligned. Like you couldn't have asked for a better deal. And we get to the very end of the process. And when I say very end, I mean, there was one signature left from Compaq. And then we were going to announce the deal. And it was a Friday and it didn't show up. And this is, as a tech company, I was waiting for a document to come over a fax machine. The irony of that is not lost on me. It gets to like about 11 a.m. and I start sending myself test faxes, like maybe the fax
is working. Right.
I'm looking out my office, jiggling it, the whole thing.
And what year was this again?
Gosh, this would have been 01?
Okay.
I think it would have been 01.
Okay.
So they came and went. And I was trying not to freak out, and I'm calling my bankers and I'm like, I'm freaking out. And they're like, don't freak out. Everything's fine. And I'm freaking out.
Yeah.
Anyway, that weekend, HP and Compaq announced they were going to merge, and my deal was off.
Wow.
Because they still wanted to do it, but both those companies had to do this merger.
Oh yeah, they focus on that.
And I was tiny relative to, ours, I think it was going to be like $1 billion transaction, which is not tiny, but in the context of HP and Compaq merging, it's tiny. No one cared to talk to us anymore. So we went, well, okay, it's like regroup time, and like time kills deals. Just I'll put that like rule number one, time kills deals. I've had acquirers' plants burned to the ground. I've had the Chinese infiltrate a system in the middle of, closing. I've had your acquirer get acquired. Like at this point of my life, like I've seen nearly all of it. I haven't had a CEO pass away in the middle of an acquisition, and I hope I never have to deal with that. But we've had about everything else. So time kills deals. Hurry up. Like I'm serious. Hurry up. And this is buyer and seller. Like it's funny, as a seller, you're like, we need to hurry up. As a buyer, you need to hurry up too. Lots of stuff happens. So anyway, we needed to transact. A longer story about sort of why it was the right choice for us to transact. We found another company. It seemed like we were going to be a good fit. We got a deal done with them. We had 9/11 in the middle of diligence on that, which I don't wish on anybody.
No.
We just kind of pretended like nothing happened and our business was as usual. And it turns out actually our business was kind of business as usual, but you can imagine an acquirer being in the middle of diligence and something like that happens. And they just go, hey, I'm out. Let's wait till the dust settles. And
listen, I don't have to imagine. I was actually practicing law and doing deals during that time.
So you get it.
Yeah.
So that transaction closed, I think, January of 2002.
Yeah.
A year later, our acquirer filed for bankruptcy, which was weird because my business was profit. I stayed on. I was a business unit guy. That's, by the way, where I learned I'm not good at being a business unit guy.
Yeah.
Like entrepreneurs, we're not good at expense reports and dealing with HR telling us some nonsense about whatever silly corporate rule. And like, there's a reason I'm not in big companies because I would not survive in that environment. My inside voice and outside voice sometimes converge, especially in meetings where somebody's full of bull. I'll just say it. So anyway, I'm there. I'm like kind of destabilized. I'm like, our business is profitable. We're doing well, but the parent company disintegrates and files for 11. And so they end up auctioning off the parts.
Yeah.
When I got to buy it back. So that was
and I'm assuming a bit of a discount from what it was sold.
It was at a bit of a discount, yes. So that was cool. And it wasn't like I sold them a bill of goods and I got to buy it cheap. Like business was making money.
Yeah.
It just, the corporate thing didn't work out. So bought it back with some private equity folks and had a good run in round 2 of that, running as a private company.
Yeah.
And sold it again in May of 2007.
Okay. Like 5 years later.
So kind of, 5-year run there. And in Gen 2, we built the first enterprise cloud computing. So I think we launched it in 2004, late 2004, early 2005 kind of time frame. And a guy named Randy Eisenman and I had been business dating. We just liked each other, and he was a CEO and he was actually a customer of mine. And we got to complaining, as entrepreneurs do. Like no one realizes, like entrepreneurs complain a lot, but we often do something about it. And so that's the genesis. We're complaining about these investor knuckleheads spending too much time in Excel and they don't understand business and blah, blah, blah. And he had also been an investor, so he had got to see both sides of this. And eventually we just said, well, let's stop complaining. Let's fix it. Let's start an investment firm that would be the kind of capital that we wish we could have had when we were CEOs. And so that was the genesis of Satori. We started it in 2008. We had 3 crazy ideas, and they were double crazy in 2008. So there were things like, what if you had permanent capital? Like, I don't have to sell. Doesn't mean I won't. I just don't have to. Like, let me be a partner, not a business flipper.
Yep.
The second one was this idea that having done the work makes for a different kind of investor. Like if I'm talking to one of our portfolio companies about growing revenue through, building a direct B2B sales force, I've done that before. It's hard.
Right.
Like I get it. Now, I also think we can help too, but you ask different questions when you've been in the chair. And as many people know, you've either been in the chair and made payroll or you haven't. And that experience is its own kind of unique thing. So that was the second piece. And then the third one you mentioned earlier, this idea around conscious capitalism.
Yeah.
And that maybe we should quit chasing profit and let's chase value creation and extraordinary outcomes for our stakeholders. What if customers are really happy and so are employees and suppliers like working with you and those kinds of things? If you can get that part right, the investor thing and the profit thing kind of works itself out. So that was crazy talk, 15 years ago now. And that's what we set out to do. Here we are.
Well, I love it. So there's so much of that I want to break down because there's so much value in there. So obviously, you sort of came, which we do as entrepreneurs, to the positive part of the thesis, like, you were inspired to say, hey, we can do this better. What was it? You don't have to mention any names, whatever, right? And I'm sure it wasn't only your personal experience, but it was what you saw out in the marketplace. What is it about PE, about, your experience and others' experience that was concerning or problematic to you? And, it's interesting to me because I love talking about this kind of stuff because there's all kinds of views of private equity investment out there. And some of them, are on the mark, but some of them are really like people talking about have no experience and they have no idea. And they blame PE for stuff that really shouldn't be blamed.
That's right.
And vice versa. And then, there's good and there's bad and all that kind of stuff. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business, Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to coreycupfer.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. So talk to me a little bit about what was that complaint was specifically that inspired you to move forward with this three-part philosophy?
Yeah, I would start it with a couple of things. So the culture piece and the value of talent and why culture matters to building value for investors, they just haven't had that experience more often than not, right? So even a big PE firm might have 100 people in a large one. Well, these are companies of hundreds of thousands or 10,000 people that understanding how things that aren't on the P&L create value is often tough. And look, our industry has gotten better at this over time, for sure. But that, like everything, it felt a lot like being a public company. It wasn't as bad, but everything's like, if it's not in the P&L and it's not this quarter, I don't want to hear about it. And I'll give you an example from one of our portfolio companies.
Okay.
So we have been an investor in this company for about 4 years. So if you're a normal private equity, you're like hiring a banker, time to get ready to sell it. And the company's largest customer came to it and said, we would like you to open a plant next door to our headquarters. Well, like opening a plant is hard. Yeah. It's one of the hardest things you can do as a manufacturer, especially if it's your second plant. Your third one's a little easier.
Sure. Because if you haven't replicated it before, the initial replication is...
Yeah, but round one of standing up a new plant, man, that's tough. So it's going to take a while. It cost a bunch of money. Well, if we had a normal investment horizon, we'd be like, no, let's leave that meat on the bone, is what it's called, on the bone for the next guy. Tell them the largest customer wants to do this, but let's not, because we won't even get it to break even for 3 years. Why would we do that?
Right.
Well, our mindset is let's create value in the business, like on an NPV basis. If this is a good move for the business, do the move. Yeah. And like, let the exit stuff come. Well, you know how these stories turn out. We did it anyway, because it was the right thing to do for the customer and the right thing to do for the business. And we had an extraordinary result as an investor in the business, because it took us from being a regional player to a national player. It put this big customer on lockdown. Like, we did all the stuff. And so the potential buyers for it were all like, no problem. We're not worried about that. Because they could see, because we had stood it up, they could see how valuable it was. That was one of the best performing investments we've ever made. And we did the opposite of what you're supposed to do in year 4. Yeah.
So I was going to say, so let me delve into it a little bit, because with most PE, firms, their time pressure, it's sort of a serious thing that create that time horizon, right? It's that they've raised the fund. That fund has an end date, right? Where they've got to, get returns and they'll return capital to people, right? In X amount of time. And that sort of puts them on a clock to be able to want to exit, within a particular time to show the returns and et cetera, et cetera. So how do you, without revealing anything confidential, but philosophically, how do you adjust for the fact, or do you do something very different in terms of your investors as well and their expectations of, of timing of returns and or, completion of a fund?
Yeah. So our investors have backed us to say, we will exit when it's time.
Perfect.
And that might be 2 years. We had an investment, we exited in 2 years. That was driven by the leadership team. They saw an opportunity and they were like, hey, we want to do this. They're like, that sounds great. Let's go. But it makes it much more challenging to raise capital, because most of the capital sources in the world, when I'm like, yeah, we don't have an end date, they're like, well, what if you don't sell it? I'm like, that means I think it's creating value at a rate at which I would be foolish to sell it. And our economics are aligned. So yeah, I'm not selling it. Right. And they're like, well, you mean we could be stuck in it for a decade? And I'm like, look, we got to the point where we realized there was no amount of explaining we could ever do that was going to change somebody's mind.
Yeah.
So we just found the tribe that heard our story and went, oh my gosh, that's amazing. So the truth of it is, our investors, they're us. They're business owners and people that used to own a business, because when they hear our story, they're like, that's exactly what the world needs. Can I invest? And we went, yeah, sure, man. Come on. And we looked up one day and realized that's our investor base. So that's cool, because they're a lot of fun to be around too, because they're us.
Yeah. And it really, it reinforces in another context something I say to my clients, I've said on this podcast all the time, and that is whether it's a value proposition out to your clients or it's a value proposition, like we do a lot of M&A. So I always talk about, you need a value proposition to M&A targets, right? Coming in, that's, different than, because a lot of firms don't do that. I'm like, well, why would they come to you, right? You need a value prop for these people you're targeting. And it's the same thing when you're raising investment capital, whether it's in a company or whether it's through, a fund or you're a PE firm or whatever. And the great part that I always say about these situations is, that clear value proposition, which includes, in your case, let's call it patient capital, right? And the opportunity to maximize value that way. Not only does that attract you to the right people, but it also repels, right? In your case, the majority of investors out there, which is actually, some people think that's a bad thing, but that's a great thing because you don't waste time on them.
That's right. Yeah, it's a little bit, as entrepreneurs, we all have to go through this like FOMO journey of wanting to stay, like the fear of missing out, and well, what if that customer wanted to buy from me, and all this stuff. And for a lot of us, one day we go, hey, let's just have a really tight definition of who's not our customer.
Yeah.
And let's not spend any time talking to those people ever again. Exactly. Because the people who are, if you get your value prop right, the people who want to be your customer, they're like magnetically attracted to you. They're like, this is amazing. This is totally different. I wish this some of you, and they get excited about it instead of like trying to change somebody's mind in a meeting. Like, I'm too old for that.
100%. And it applies to customers, it applies to acquisition targets, it applies to investors, it applies to every stakeholder, every constituent that you're talking about.
Yeah, I'll give you an example from Satori, a couple of them actually. If you want to sell 100% of your business, we're not a good fit for it.
Yeah.
Because if you're saying, hey, I got to go because I don't want to work on this anymore, you know more than I do, man.
Right.
I've been on the other side. It's a little bit like when guys are like, oh yeah, I'll stay around for 2 years for a transition. I said that stuff too.
Yeah.
What does that really mean? Your bankers told you had to say that, and you'll hang around for as long as you have to get your deal done.
Right.
Now, I will draw
get your earn out, baby.
That's right. And so I'll draw one exception. We had an investment where the owner had a health issue.
Yeah.
He just literally said, I can't run this business anymore, but I have a number two, meet my number two, and you decide for yourself if they're capable. And we met her, and it was like, she's amazing. We're in. But that's different than some guy handing you the keys and he's like, yeah, I'm going to the beach. That's it. So we've learned like, hey, that's not for us. And another one is, there are some people, and I make no value judgment here, they just want quiet capital. Yep. They want to be left alone. They don't actually want a partner. And that's no fun. So it's not a fit for us. Like if you want a partner and like, let's get in there together and work on it, man, it's great. And if you just want somebody to like, that acts like the bank, that shows up once a quarter from reporting, and you really want them to just go away, or it's not a good fit, I'll help you find somebody that's good at that, but it's not us.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny because I can hear it in your passion of obviously comes from the background, like that strategic help, that partner, that business partnership, that, working together to figure out how to create value and how this thing grow is what's interesting. And it's what's interesting to me as well. I mean, for me, obviously there's some things I just do passive investments in, but it's one of the reasons I love doing what I do, because I help in a different way. I help businesses grow, whether that's through acquisition strategy, or any other kind of deal. So that's great. But you're right. I mean, some people don't. And listen, some people, You hear these horror stories about, overly involved PE, right? But, in a negative way, like they're preventing you from making these decisions, they're doing this. So I think there's some folks that, that assume that if a PE firm's involved, it's going to be only telling what they can't do as opposed to providing strategic.
Yeah, or it's we call it the help that comes in air quotes. Oh boy, they're here to help again.
Right, right.
And so look, there's a little bit of truth in everything. And I'll remind the listeners, if you just read what the media has to say about CEOs, they're all crazy narcissists that only care about themselves.
That's right.
And that's the opposite of my experience. Like most CEOs I know care deeply about the people around them. So that the narrative about CEOs is not very correct. I think the narrative about private equity, it all has truth. It's very dependent on the firm and their work styles and just what they're good at and what they like doing. And by the way, if your plan is to run as an acquisition platform and like the whole thesis around the thing is, look, I want to buy this company and then I'm going to do a bunch of bolt-ons, you better get help from your PE. You should expect it because it's hard and it's a lot of work and you need a bunch of people to do that. You want help to show up for that stuff because it's for real.
No question. And listen, if you study, and then I could talk about countless industries where, if you look at anybody who is a serial acquirer or roll-up firm or whatever you want to call it, right, at whatever level, I think there's hardly any exceptions to the fact that they're PE backed. I mean, if you're going to do one or two deals here or there, that different story. You might be able to self-fund that, get lending funding, get SPV investor or whatever. But if you're gonna do multiple deals, not only you need ongoing access to capital, but you also need that strategic view. And a lot of the clients that have PE, I mean, overall, frankly, a lot of folks have been very happy with their experience, and it's just you just got to know when it's appropriate and when it's for. And you're right, even the popular media will. Listen, it's much more interesting to report on the CEO who is forced out by the PE firm. Right. And the drama around that than the 100 deals that are working, and of course, usually it's from that CEO's point of view, what happened. And they might even talk about how the culture was bad or how they promised to hit certain targets and didn't come close or whatever it is. So, there's always two sides, the three sides.
So you remind me, I wrote an article a while back. I think it's called Never Say Never. And the point of the article was this, like I meet people that say, well, I'll never take debt or I'll never take equity.
Yeah.
And the point I made in the article was this, it's a tool.
Yeah.
Think about it like a tool. My drill is not good or bad. It's a tool. It does a thing. And it's designed to do a really specific thing. And so don't come into it with a preconceived notion. Just be aware that it's, you will chop your finger off with a skill saw if you use it wrong.
Right.
So don't say you'll never take PE or you don't want to do debt or whatever. Just think about where and how it can be useful. And I do think you make a good point, though. If you're going to run hard on the acquisitions, like private equity is the right kind of capital to have. It's one of the things that while I might complain about, PE may not be good at helping you figure out digital marketing or how to improve your culture, how to do 100 acquisitions in 10 years. That's the stuff they do. Like they're pretty good at it. As a rule, that's their comfort place. It's legal docs and Excel stuff and integration plans. And so that can be a really useful tool. And I want to point out one other thing, just so I don't lose it. If I had 3 or 4 pieces of advice to give to my operating company self, one of the things that would make the list is do more acquisitions. We had great flow-through margins, great infrastructure. So we were built, like one of the ways I think about M&A is like, if your next dollar of revenue converts at 80% of it flows to the bottom line, that's a marker to say, pay attention on acquisitions. If you're pretty organized, pay attention on that. We were organized and had high flow-through margins. Look, if you're disorganized and have low margin, acquisitions could make it a lot worse. You'll be more disorganized and have lower margin.
That's right.
And so that's actually one of the tools that as a young CEO was not in my toolbox. I chickened out a bunch of times. And with the benefit of experience and hindsight, we're a public company.
Yeah.
Company worth $3 billion. I use that currency that it wasn't worth $3 billion. That's what it was priced at. It wasn't worth that. I could have bought a lot of stuff And I just didn't do it. So silly me. I know better now.
Well, it's interesting you said, and I want to spend a lot of time on this because I want to get back to you and a little more about story and then the book. But it's interesting timing because I just got back. I mean, at the time it'll be a couple months later this gets aired, but at the time we're recording this, I got back a few weeks ago from Singapore, and I was at the Global Leadership Conference for Entrepreneurs Organization. I was presenting. I'm the My EO Deal Exchange Champion, which means I run the Deals Conference and the Deals Group in EO. And I did a new presentation that I put together, and really there were two focuses of it. One was I realized, and I started talking about that we all, as entrepreneurs, we all have a very clear understanding. We talk about it all the time about the difference in mindset between an employee and an entrepreneur, right? And some of us were employees, became entrepreneurs. We talk about that transition, or we certainly look at our employees versus our entrepreneurial mentality and talk about that sometimes in not so positive ways. But it's very clear, and there's all kinds of materials out there. But I also talk about that there's a mindset shift between an entrepreneur and a deal maker. Right? And you just illustrated that perfectly. Like you were a very highly successful entrepreneur. You had made that shift, but there was at least this aspect of deal, and you raised capital. So you had that aspect of deal making, but the M&A aspect of deal making, you didn't have at that time. And it's just like you said about some other stuff. It is a tool in the toolbox. It's not a tool you have to use. Like you don't have to use PE, raising PE money, but it's a tool in the toolbox that can solve a lot of things. And the whole approach to the presentation in Singapore that I did a few times was what is your challenge, issue, problem, pain point in your business? And like there's an app for that, there's a deal for that. Doesn't mean you have to do the deal, but there is a deal for that. Great example, having trouble hiring. Like a lot of people look at talent. Okay, you can recruit, you can put up, job posts, you can hire recruiters, but you could also acquire companies that have talent, or you can do an acqui-hire where it's positioned like it is a hire, but you really are. Right? Well, you can do some sort of joint venture or strategic alliance to get that talent on a contract basis, right? So I won't go into all the examples, but the point is that there is a deal for that, and switching that mindset to include being a deal maker in addition to an entrepreneur just gives you another set of tools. You may or may not choose to use them to solve a particular problem, but they're another potential solution.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I would have had that in my toolbox.
Well, yeah, listen, it's part of our evolution, right? We keep growing and learning. And fortunately for the companies that you guys invest in, you now, I'm sure, bring that conversation to your portfolio companies, right? Because now you know that there's that toolbox. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the investments. It doesn't have to be particular companies, but are there particular sectors you focus in? There are areas that you really like right now? Talk to us a little bit about more on the focus of where you're investing.
Yeah, so 3 spaces. One is manufacturing, where you've got a bunch of engineers or intellectual property.
Yeah.
So one of our companies makes a thing that costs $1 million and it takes a year to build.
Wow.
Okay, like that business is very different than Caterpillar sends me the prints to make the brake pedal for their bulldozer. Like very different margins, very different competitive realities. So we do well in manufacturing that's hard, complicated. There's a bunch of degrees running around. One of our companies makes a turbine that spins at 10,000 RPM that pulls sulfur out of coal power plants. Wow. When you spin a turbine that fast, if it's wrong by the tiniest amount, it just disintegrates. Yeah. So that is hard to make. Well, stuff that's hard to make, it can often be a good business if you can figure out like how to make it repeatably and reliably. So that's one space where we do very well.
And that was interesting to me before you go on to the other ones, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems logical that it could align because longer manufacturing cycles, right? All that kind of stuff, which means that more patient capital, if the investors are looking for quarterly results on businesses that have such a much longer time horizon, maybe more of a mismatch, right?
Yeah, if your sales cycle is a year, and then a year to build it, you need to be a good planner. Yeah. But now it also means that you need to be organized and have a sales pipeline and be able to predict future, revenues and a bunch of stuff that often isn't there when we get there, which is fine. That's what we're here to do, is to help on that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So the second one we call white truck businesses.
Yeah.
So these are businesses where a skilled technician gets in literally a white truck in their work boots and drives to a location to do a thing that's hard that you can't go to school for.
Okay.
So I'll give you 2 examples. One was a company that we actually recently had an exit in. It was machinery moving. So you need to move a 10-ton chiller onto the top of a data center.
Okay.
If you drop it, what happens? Bad. Bad.
Yeah.
You have a machine that makes silicon wafers for graphics cards. What happens if you drop it? It's bad. These things aren't like, it's not a container that's easy to move around. They're complicated and there's a bunch of moving parts and load points. Anyway, it takes a skilled technician to figure out how to even pick this thing up.
Yeah.
That's a white truck business. And they did, data centers and chip fabs and big manufacturing, kind of like the complex manufacturing thing.
Yeah.
Well, we often have big complex machines in those companies. How do you move it to the new plant? So that's what they did. One we just completed an investment in is a fire protection business. So they engineer, design, install, and maintain fire suppression and fire alarm systems.
Okay.
It's complicated. And the stakes are, if you get it wrong, the thing burns down or everybody's stuff's wet or so high stakes. We tend to one of the themes that you'll see is in these two is kind of high stakes work, which is not surprising given the background I had before in my other two jobs. So this white truck business, I think we're pretty good at helping these companies really scale up and be bigger versions of themselves, some organic, some acquisitions, and culture. This is true in both manufacturing and in the white truck business. These industries tend to not have a heavy focus on culture.
Yeah.
That's just how they've been for most of history. And I just, as a data point on our focus on culture, this year, the best small business to work at in the state of Texas is Satori. Wow. We're very serious about this stuff. And so if I can make a little bit of progress in culture and have people feel like they have good jobs with leaders that care about them and they're rewarded for performance, guess what? That talent problem you just talked about a minute ago kind of starts to go away, because if everybody in your industry wants to work at your company, where are you? You're in a different place. Yeah. So that's the second one, is this white truck. And then the third one is what I would call classic brands. Right? Yeah. Companies that have been around for a while, they make a consumer product, and some of them make it themselves, some of them don't.
Yeah.
They haven't really unlocked the direct-to-consumer thing yet. Right? They're not selling on Amazon. They don't sell much direct to their customers. They're just used to selling through some distribution channel. And it's not just, I'm going to run some digital ads. It's, hey, you used to send out truckloads or pallet loads full of your product, and now you got to send out one. In a box to somebody that, by the way, it has to go out today. Because if it takes you 4 days to ship it, your customers are going to lose their mind, which means it's a cultural transformation for that part of the business. So that's the third sector that we're good at. And then occasionally we'll see a thing that's values aligned that doesn't fit one of our sectors, but we look at it and just say, man, we're a good fit here. We've got a company that provides basically schools. It's 28 schools for the bottom 3% of high school kids. Mm. These are kids that are not going to graduate unless there's an intervention.
Yeah.
And so the public schools actually give us the kids with the kids, sent, or their parents is sent, and say, help this kid. And we can't get them all graduated. I think the latest stats are we take about 25% of them and get them graduated. We're doing lots of continuing education. We've got training them how to be a nurse in VR while they're in school. Is the emotional reward from this business of seeing kids that, look, I'm going to tell you one brief story. We started doing interviews. The company started doing interviews with these kids after they graduated. Hey, did you ever think you were going to be here? Yeah. So I asked this one kid, you think you were going to make it to graduation? Deadpan looks at the camera and says, graduation? I didn't think I was going to be alive. You're like, dude, we're making a difference. And it's for investors, it's a great business, but the impact that thing has in every community it goes into is just, you can't make it up. It's really cool. So sometimes we see something like that just speaks to us and says, yeah, we can be a good fit for this thing.
Love it. So before we get to the final two questions, I want to give you a chance to talk about the book a little bit.
Yeah. So the book, Selling Without Selling Out. As I mentioned earlier, never wanted to be an author, didn't have designs on it. And I started doing a little speaking on M&A and how to get your head right and how to get ready for M&A. I think the very first one, somebody asked me to come talk on M&A preparedness.
Yeah.
And as I spent some time reflecting on it, what I realized was everybody wants to talk about the stuff that fits in Excel. And nobody wants to talk about the stuff between your ears.
Yeah.
And here's what I learned. And this was a combination of my own experiences and a bunch of CEO interviews that I did with people that had either raised capital or had sold their business. And it all really came back to the same thing. Most CEOs care about more than money. They just do. It's not that they don't care about money. They just also have other things they care about. And the process works a little bit like this. Figure out who you care about. Figure out what you want for them. And write it down. Like, selling to a strategic is not necessarily good or bad. What do you want for your people? Sometimes a sale to a strategic can create extraordinary growth opportunities for your team. Sometimes it's bad. You just have to decide. And in the book, I make no moral judgment on what you should care about. That's not the issue. That's a you thing. You figure out what you care about. And if all you care about is money, just do the normal, lawyers and investment bankers stuff and you'll be fine. But if you care about your team or your customers or your community or these other things, you've got some real questions to ask yourself, and you can't outsource this stuff. These are questions that only you can answer. You can't go to your accountant and say, who should I care about? This stuff's on you. It requires some reflection. And one of the key learnings was you have to write it down. Two things happen when you write it down. One, and I see this happen for me all the time. I'll write it. Oh, I know what I'm talking about, and I'll write it down. And you pick it up the next day and you go, oh my gosh, that's not at all what I mean. And you start tuning and tweaking and poking, and eventually you actually get clarity on what it is that you really want.
Yes.
But the other thing is, if you go to your deal attorney and you say, oh, I want XYZ, and you just say it, their outside voice is going to be like, oh, okay, cool. Inside voice is, I've seen this movie 100 times. When the LOIs come in, they're just going to pick the top price and
Right. They're saying they care about this, that, but
that's right. Yeah. And the bankers have the same inside voice, outside voice. Oh yeah, we'll help you find that. And they know they'll put all the LOIs in a spreadsheet and you'll pick the big number and off it goes. But when you write it down and you hand your deal team a document that says, this is who I care about and this is what I want for them, they will actually understand that you're serious about it. And it'll change how they engage with your company. It'll change how they talk to potential acquirers. It's transformative when you have it written down. There's one other thing that happens that's kind of interesting, and I talk about this in the book. There's a story of a particular company. I think it was Investopedia. These two owners had written down their number. Instead of just having the number in their head, they wrote it down, and they put it in an envelope, and they sealed it. And they got into deal mode. And there was some nonsense, and there's always nonsense in deals. Acquirers and investors are going to do stuff that'll make you crazy, and you're like, oh, that's not fair. And you'll get all stirred up about it. And one of the two partners said, hey, man, let's get that envelope out. And they pulled the envelope out, and they opened it up, and they were already 20 or 30% above what they thought was a good deal. Yeah. And they looked at it, and they went, yeah, we're going to stop worrying about all this little nonsense and stop. Because I've seen it, man. It's happened to me. You feel like you're wrong and there's an injustice.
Ego.
Can't believe they're doing this thing.
Yeah.
Hey, man, do not let a fair deal get in the way of a good deal.
Yeah. Listen, we don't have a lot of time for it, but you're talking about a lot of the stuff I talk about in my Authentic Negotiating book, right? The top 6 reasons negotiations fail are all internal in my book. I don't talk about tactics and counter tactics. I talk about ego, rigidity, scarcity, fear, all this stuff. Because we're human, and that's what comes up. And I love getting that clarity. There's a process I do, and they're called CPR, context, purpose, results. That is somebody writing down not only the results they want, but then why, the purpose they want to achieve, and the context they need to hold. Meaning, they want to be calm, and whatever it is. And it's all for those same reasons that you were talking about, right? And there's a reason I tell them it has to be in writing. So he's definitely speaking my language. Well, this is good stuff. So all right, so let people know where they can find out more about the book, find out more about your company, or anything else you want them to know.
Yeah, go to sunnyvanderbeck.com. Again, first name, last name, trying to keep it simple. You'll have contact info there, more about the book. I made a couple of workbooks. I was so serious about this write it down thing. I got a couple of workbooks on the site to just help you write it down. So yeah, get in touch with me through there. And I'd love to hear from anybody. If I can be useful to you, I'll be happy to do it.
That's great, Sunny. So my final question on the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom around the world for all people from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
Yeah, so freedom, a bunch of overlapping meanings, especially having been in the military.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's very much about choice, right? Being able to live in choice and being able to live to your potential. Whatever that is for a human, like, is there anything in the way of that? Now, we get in our own way sometimes. Sometimes it's like freedom from my own nonsense. That's really the issue. But being free to choose what you think is best for you, and sometimes just what is best for you, even if you don't think it's best, that's a thing that I wish more people in the world have. Every time I travel around the world, I am reminded of how special it is here. It's just special. And we don't get it on a given Tuesday. We're like, oh, we got problems. Hey, in the States, we mostly have high rent problems, especially as entrepreneurs. Like, these are not bad problems to have. The world is a pretty wild place. A lot of people are hungry, deal with a bunch of violence. And never forget, the existence of a great company does have a fingerprint on the world. You're like, hey, I want to change the world.
That.
Hey, I got thousands of people that come to work at these companies and can live their potential and grow as humans and go home, and their spouse and their kid interact with somebody that's full of passion and life about the world, not somebody who gets beat down at work. Companies may have more impact on the human experience than any other thing in the world. So be careful. Like, be careful with what you're building. It has more impact than you'll ever know. I'm reminded of a comment from a friend of mine, a guy named Rand Stagen. He said, as a leader, the conversation at the dinner table for your team is what you did today. Like, never forget that. Like, what the offhand comment you made, the little boost you gave to somebody to cheer them on, the way you showed up consistent with your company's values, whatever it is that you're doing every day is getting transmitted into all these families, customers, suppliers, vendors. As CEOs, we have a big opportunity to create more freedom in the world, whether it's real freedom or just freedom from your own mind.
Love that. And that phrase you said about creating a great company leaves a fingerprint on the world. I love, like, that sums it up right there. What a great phrase that is. And I really do believe that. Sunny Vanderbeck, thank you for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. The Deal Den is a place where entrepreneurs, high-level executives, and business leaders come together, support each other's growth and success, and share what's working best, as well as what challenges we are facing right now. You will get input not only from me, but from all of our members. We collaborate and serve each other. To join us, go to corykupfer.com/dealden. I'll see you there. I'm Cory Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.